The General Data Protection Regs is being introduced on the 25th of May. It actually came in back in 2016. And it is now going to be legal requirements for organisations in Ireland and Europe to apply General Data Protection Regs requirements. So I'm going to bring you through a very high-level, pragmatic description of the 99 requirements of the General Data Protection Regs and how they impact on you and your operation, and best practice in terms of my recommendations of what you should do to make sure your company is compliant. So why are they bringing out the new General Data Protection Regs? So basically, the last General Data Protection Regs was back in 1995, so nearly over 20 years ago. There was 2003 and 1998 regs. So 20 years ago, basically, we didn't have Facebook, we didn't have Amazon, we didn't have LinkedIn, we didn't have all the big social media, and their big business is basically data, and that's why they give you all their applications for free. So if you go onto Facebook, you get your account, it's for free, but it's not for free because you're giving away your data, and they're going to use that data to profile you so they can basically advertisers can go and get a contract with Facebook and say, well, I'd like to sell my products or services into this profile of a lady between 20, 30 years of age, living in Ireland. She likes XYZ. My product, I would like you just to pop my ad into her profile. So that's basically what happened in very, very quick terms. Is that okay? So as a result, the European Union realised that all of our data regulations and standards are out of date, completely out of date. So General Data Protection Regs is to protect the European citizen. That's what it's about. So here we are, we have to protect the European citizen. So what are we protecting the European citizen from doing? So we're protecting your data. We're protecting what people do with your data. We're protecting how people share your data and what they use it for, whether that's selling your email address, your profiles, your likes, your religious beliefs, your political beliefs, your sexual orientation, whatever it is, it's being sold at this moment in time. So come the 25th of May, the new General Data Protection Regs are going to protect all of us on an individual level. Okay, now we bring it into business. So what's going to happen in business? You have European citizens' information in the form of your employees. You have employee information, past employee information, and you have current employee information, and you're going to have future employee. And it's now going to be your obligation to make sure that you protect that data. Okay, so that's one stream, and every company in Ireland that has obviously employees is going to have employee data. So that's what the General Data Protection Regs is about. So I'm a numbers woman, okay? So as I said, General Data Protection Regs is coming out on 25th of May. It's here to stay, it's not going away. Look, if it's a case that you haven't done anything and you're only starting out in your journey, that's okay. You just have to do a gap analysis of your current data protection policies and procedures and operational control, and cross-reference to the 99 requirements of General Data Protection Regs. So what's really important is everybody seems to think that General Data Protection is just all about IT. Only one part of it is IT. IT are responsible for the security of that data. So that's the very end. So you have to understand what data you have. You have to analyze that data, and you have to protect that data, and you have to make sure it's secure. And they're the rules. So basically IT are involved, but only from the security. So that's the firewalls, the malware, the protecting you from phishing attacks. It's the encryption, it's the different remote wiping access. So all of the cybersecurity essentials, that's what the IT department is for. So that's the very end of the process. So you're only starting out, so you have to do a process mapping data. And what we've done for clients is we've interviewed people in HR, marketing, sales, reception, security. Everyone that touches a piece of data has to be interviewed. And then you also have to bring in your third-party providers, because let's say you might outsource payroll, you might bring in a shredding company, you might have deliveries, you might have couriers. So anyone that touches or feels any data that you hold, but whether it's a company or employee data, you have to bring them into your data protection team. Is that okay? So as I said, General Data Protection Regs, it's not just IT, it's security, legal, compliance, risk, and data. Anyone here with an ISO 9001 system? So you'd expect General Data Protection Regs, the risk of breach, the risk of, the misuse of personal data, all to be on your risk register. Is that okay? So here's my numbers. there's 6 principles, 11 chapters, and 99 requirements. So just to put it in perspective, you have to implement 99 requirements into your organization. If you had a data breach, what would happen is that has to be reported to the Data Protection Commissioner Office. Helen Dixon is Ireland's Data Protection Commissioner. She's the local supervisory authority of Ireland. And she's also responsible for Facebook. She's also responsible for Google. She's also responsible for making sure all the data protection 99 regulations are implemented. So what happens? If there is a breach, let's just say hypothetical, what happens is that someone from her office comes out and does an audit. What do they audit you on? The 99 requirements of the General Data Protection Regs. And that's the easiest way I can break it down. Is that okay? And there's 6 principles that applies to the new General Data Protection Regs. Now, these General Data Protection Regs are replacing the current data protection regs. So at the moment, you could get prosecuted if you were emailing 2,000 people saying, hey, it's Caroline Geoghegan here, I'm the Managing Director of CG Business Consulting, I'm providing GDPR consultancy. If I got reported, if I sent that to somebody that didn't have consent, they were very up to date with the General Data Protection Regs, they could report me to the Data Protection Commission, and then they would do an investigation, and the burden of proof is on me that they had given me consent to contact them. And that's why now everyone is kind of up in arms about General Data Protection Regs, because it's having a massive impact on cold calling, marketing, and people contacting you that you've never met, that you've never given permission to contact you, because your email address is personal data. Okay? So that's the kind of main headline. So what they're trying to, I suppose, educate you on, and using these 6 principles, is that if you have the 8 rules of data protection, you must obtain and process information fairly. Okay? It also said that you need to keep it only for one or more specified explicit and lawful purposes. You need to use and disclose it only in ways compatible with those purposes, and your obligation to make sure that that data is kept safe and secure. It also, you have a responsibility to make sure that that personal data is adequate, relevant, and not excessive. So, for example, we work with some construction companies, and they might have passports of past employees. They could have someone that worked in their organisation 20 years ago, 15 years ago. They've no lawful reason for holding that. So our recommendation, based on consultation with GDPR solicitors, was that there's no lawful reason for them to hold that data, therefore we would recommend shred it, except if there was a pension or payroll. Does that make sense? So always keep your pension or payroll. Anything else? From a health and safety perspective, your records is a legal obligation for you to hold those health and safety records. So we would recommend that you review your health and safety records, and there's a lawful reason for you to hold it. So for 3 years or 10 years, whatever type of health and safety records that you have. Okay, now what we have understood in the industry is to retain your health and safety records for 3 years. So they're the kind of 6 principles. Remember I said there was 99 requirements? These are them. Now don't worry, I'm not going to go through these 99 requirements. So chapter 1 is the general provisions, and it's actually quite interesting. This is all freely available, and it's written in plain English. It's not written in legal jargon that's very hard to interpretate. It's actually quite straightforward, and you can get this. So if you Google GDPR 99 requirements, it's all there on gdprnu.ie. It's all there for you to in plain English, for you to understand. So chapter 1 is basically all about the subject matter and objectives. It's like an introductory, okay? Chapter 2 is all about the principles. So they're the 6 principles that I just kind of gave you an overview of. I'm more interested in chapter 3, the rights of the data subject. So this is the most, I suppose, important chapter that you should focus on if you are going to, I suppose, try and implement the GDPR requirements yourself. But the information is there. So chapter 3 is all about the rights of the data subject. You're the data subject. I'm the data subject. Your employees, your subcontractors, your suppliers, your client is all that data subject. Is that okay? And that's their rights. Okay? And this is where, God forbid, if you ever were, because Helen Dixon is basically has to show that she means business about data protection. So the only way to mean business is to start prosecuting people for breaches of data. So you're going to start seeing a lot more cases being brought through and a lot more publicity about the first people who are being breached with regards to the new general data protection regulations. Please don't be that first person. But the people that really, the companies that they're going to be focusing on is anyone that holds data on children, vulnerable people, the sick, the elderly, our medical information, insurance companies and banks. They're the kind of 5 top areas that they're the ones that have a lot of control over data and what they use with that data. Then you've got chapter 4, the controller and the processor. So that's the first thing you need to figure out. Do you control the data or do you process the data? So for example, I would have a marketing firm, Anya, she's fantastic, okay? And we basically would email her my marketing database list. So I'm the controller, she's the processor because I'm emailing her my data to process. Does that make sense? So you as an organization, the very first step is figure out whether you're a data controller or a data processor. If you've more than 250 employees, you're a data controller and you need to make sure that you appoint a competent data protection officer. Okay? Then we have the transfer of personal data to third countries, independent supervisory. So for example, Facebook has a number of offices throughout Europe. Their head office is in Dublin. Therefore, we're the supervisory authority here in Ireland. Does that make sense? So if you've got a number of locations in the world, you have to come back to where your head office is. Cooperation and consistencies, liability sanctions. So this is the whole 20 million or 4% global turnover if you have a data breach. They're the kind of headliners. Provisions relating to specific data processing situations, delegated acts, and then final provisions. And then again, a continuation of Chapter 11, final provisions. This is a summary of the headlines, okay? The big one is tough penalties, fines of up to 4% of the annual global revenue or 20 million, whichever is great, for a data breach. An example of a data breach would be the loss of a bank's 80,000 names, bank account details. So if you've got a data breach, there'll be an investigation, but you need to report that data breach within 72 hours. The regulation applies to all EU and non-EU. I know Brexit is looming. They're still going to apply general data protection regs because this is a data protection regulations for all European citizens. So they still have to apply it because they have data belonging to European citizens. Does that make sense? So they can't come up with their own British general data protection regs. Does that make sense? Everyone has to follow GDPR. It's the same rules for all. Another headliner is basically that you have to get parental consent for the processing of data for children under the age of 16. Did you see in the news there 2 weeks ago that WhatsApp have now basically changed their rules that they will not allow children under the age of 13 to use WhatsApp? Did you read that? Why are they doing that? Because general data protection regs. They have to get parental consent of anyone under the age of 13. Okay, so it's too big of a job to actually do. So what they had to do is basically say, sorry, we're limiting our WhatsApp messaging because we can't get consent. Did you see that large pub franchise over in the UK? He's basically said that he's completely wiped all of his database because he does not have consent to have those people on his database. So he's Witherspoon, is it? Witherspoon, yeah. So all of these kind of communications are coming out of what people are... Is it Witherspoon? Wetherspoon, sorry, yeah, sorry. So that's an example of... You've seen Mark Zuckerberg honestly, I just think it's incredible the way this dropped just before General Data Protection Regs is about to go live on the 25th. It's like as if it's staged. But that's all Mark Zuckerberg, and the issue with data with Facebook is all General Data Protection Regs. And you're going to start noticing in all of your apps that you're now asking to look at privacy notice, website cookies, and look actually at what we're doing with your data. Is that okay? And that's because these are the rules that people have to apply. So you basically have to make sure, and this is key for everyone to take away, you have to obtain consent for processing personal data. It must be clear, it must seek an affirmative response. So you have to get anyone that you have data on to basically give you consent. There's no black or white area or grey area here. It's quite straightforward. You have to get consent. Okay, and then you have to prove it that you got consent. Date stamp, electronic signature, you have to prove it. So anyone here in ISO, it should be easy for you in terms of the burden of proof. Okay, so that's another headliner there. So the second page is basically the appointment of a data protection officer is going to be mandatory for companies processing high volumes of personal data and good practice. Privacy risk assessments will also be required, and you need to report all data breaches within 72 hours. Anyone here with ISO 27001? ISO 27001 is an ISO standard specifically around information security. So it could be something that you'll consider down the line. But 70% of the 99 requirements required for general data protection regs is in the ISO 27000 standard. So that would be a consideration for somebody. We have clients that we've implemented ISO 27001 because they would process, let's say, Garda records for, let's say if you're caught speeding. The guards don't send you that letter. It's actually sent to a data processor. So how can that data processor give guarantees, let's say, to the guards that their information is secure? Well, I have an ISO 27001, which means that we bring in a company that audits our system against best practice for information security, and here's our certification or accreditation. Is that okay? So again, it depends on what products or services that you have. So I think you're going to take it away from me today. It's all about the data. So when you start off on your general data protection journey, my advice to you, and this is what we have done in my own organization, we set up a data protection team. Okay? So health and safety team. You have a health and safety team that protects the safety of your workforce. Now you need to set up a team to protect your data. Okay? So you need to understand what your data is. So I've given a couple of examples here today. And these are the questions that you need to ask. Do you know what data you hold? Who has access to it and for what purpose? Do you know how you will manage consents and data right? Do you know how long you will retain it? Do you ever share it with third parties? And what basis or legal consent do you have to share that information? Do you know how you will protect your data and ensure it has the appropriate controls? That's your IT department. Is that okay? So what is data? I've got 3 slides here on what data is. Credit cards, bank statements, medical records. Just mention rare disease and you'll have to do a privacy risk assessment. Any medical information, that's the high kind of risk areas. Full name. Data in the way they basically define what data is, if you can identify somebody, that's some sort of way to identify a person. That's called data. So if I gave my street address, they could identify me by getting what my home address was. Even photos are now classed as data because apparently there's an app that you can put in a photo and it can identify you, facial recognition. Is that okay? So anything at all that you can use to identify somebody and you can put one piece of data with another piece of data, that's called data. Does that make sense? And they don't care about dead people, so it's only living people. Is that all right? So credit cards, bank statements, medical records, full name, last name, photo, phone number, birth date, email address, car license plate, physical characteristics like that ISO consultant with curly hair. Who do you think they'd talk about? It does not matter how personal data is stored. On paper, it's an IT system, CCTV photographs, and the EU Court of Justice just ruled that your IP address, which is your phone or your laptop identification, that is now considered personal data. That is why, here's a tip of the day for you. You have to update your cookies policy because your cookies policy is what you use to track people's IP addresses. And that's why cookie policies, I'll know whether you're GDPR compliant because I'll check out your cookie policy. Your cookie policy basically will tell me what applications you are using on your website to identify me, look at my habits in terms of what pages I went to see, how long I stayed on the pages, and what I looked at. and you could have tracking devices. You could be using Google Analytics. There's a range of kind of apps that you would be using. So you need to get in contact with your website provider, and I'll give you that one for free. Get in contact with your website provider, find out what cookies you're using. You have to update your cookie policy in plain English to tell people, this is our cookie policy, please read, and then you list all the cookies and what the cookies do and what you're going to use with the data, okay? So then we have projects. So I wanted to make it bespoke, obviously, to my audience today. So personal data is project data, can include details of individuals forming part of project teams. We do handle a lot of personal data related to contractors, subcontractors, and suppliers. Individual worker personal data may be recorded on access cards, security, biometrics, smart technology. BIM now is going to be big on data, and we have Ireland's leading BIM consultant up after me, Joey Maddy. So he'll take you through kind of BIM and health and safety, but that's all data. And that all has to come into the general data protection regs. Organizations store data about employees, customers, suppliers, people that they network, all which is a matter of course, but this might in circumstances include sensitive personal data relating to accidents, health issues. So we had Pep Talk here earlier on. And I had a great discussion with them because they're going to be monitoring and measuring people's behaviours. They're going to know what nutrition, how good you are in terms of what you eat, your exercise. So that's all information that people want to know so they can profile you and sell into you. So that now basically has to make sure that people that are looking at any sort of profiling in terms of what you eat, your exercise, what you wear, what you buy, how you're feeling, that is all data, and that all needs to be protected. And if you have any of that you store, review, or use, you're going to have to look at getting a data protection officer in-house. So buildings are becoming smarter. That's why we have, as I said, Joey Maddy discussing the digital process and design, construction, and operation and through BIM. And all this is basically all to do with GDPR. And that's why it's really important that you get your project plan in place. And don't panic, okay, the 25th of May is coming thick and fast, but you just have to make sure that there's no breaches, and the biggest breaches come from staff members. So I would make sure that you start GDPR awareness training amongst your staff immediately, letting them know the rules and protocols, and get everything encrypted, remote passwords, encryption, and just make sure you protect that data. Now this is kind of, this is my 10 steps to take, but before I do this, I'm going to ask you some questions which will give you an idea of what you need to do about GDPR. If you were audited by the Data Protection Office, could you complete a record of the specific individual's data, where it came from, what purpose, and what consents you have in the process? That could be a question that you're asked. Another one would be, if a customer or a staff member asked for all of their data to be delivered to them or transferred to a new data controller in a standard electronic format, could you do this quickly and cheaply? And just to let you know, on the 25th of May, if you're asked to produce any information, you have to produce that within 30 days, otherwise it's a breach. And it has to be in electronic format. So let me give you a practical example. If my doctor's in Westmeath and I now live in Dublin, and I wanted my doctor to send all my files up to my new doctor in Dublin, he has to be able to do that. And that's an example there of being able to transfer data. If you have a past employee, I want all records that you have on me. All of that records would be my induction form, my next of kin. It would be my HR exit interview. It could be any disciplinary that I had, all health and safety records, any emails as well that you have on me. So that's just kind of the biggest kind of exercise in terms of HR. Have you obtained explicit, informed, and unambiguous consent from everyone on your mailing list to continue to contact them after May 2018? That's another big project that you're going to have to do. So you are not allowed to technically email anybody on the 26th of May without having their consent. Have you had your data protection policies and procedures reviewed? And do you have procedures in place to report breaches of data principles? Don't panic. Okay. What you need to do is get a GDPR ready. You could do GDPR e-learning courses, there's GDPR assessment tools out there, and there is a lot of free information out there with the Data Protection Office, and there's a lot of people now out there selling GDPR kind of different tools. But here's my 12-step guidance. I don't know whether you can see this, but step 1, establish the project, get top-level policies in place, organize your data protection, build up your data inventory. What data do I have? Why do I have it? Where is it? What's the volume? Who can access it? Is it transferred to a third party? You need to set up a data protection team. Make sure you have HR, marketing, sales, security. Try and get one person per department involved in your data protection team. And then what you have to do is basically manage your data subject rights, complete a data protection impact assessment, check to see if your personal data transfers, and make sure all your third parties are compliant, and then make sure that you have a procedure in to handle a data breach. Or else just give me a call. Is that okay? Any questions for me? Yes. Barry, do you mind if I go here first? Sorry. He's closer.
I have 2 quick questions, Caroline. One is, do company email addresses, do they constitute personal data, or are they company? And the second question I have is in relation to company receiving CVs from people applying for positions or whatever within a company. What needs to be done with those?
Company email address is personal email address, because you can identify that person. And then in relation to CVs, I would ask that you receive it in, get it password protected. Is that okay? But you need to basically be able to lock files and lock it down, and only people that are authorised to access the information should have it. But CVs will need to be read-only. But you'll probably start seeing a lot of HR or recruitment companies will start sending it in password protected. Has anyone seen that yet? No? Password protected, but if you're sending a CV, make sure it's password protected. Declan, I can take a call.
You mentioned that employees are usually the main cause of breaches. If they're going to be prosecuted, is the employee going to be prosecuted, or the company, or both, or where does the liability lie?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. Like, I'm a business owner as well, so unfortunately, the company is prosecuted, right? What happens to the employee? It's disciplinary. Or else, you could take a civil action against them. But unfortunately, the rules are it's your obligation to make sure that you protect that data. So the way that you manage employees, what we've done personally is I updated my employment contracts, I updated my employee handbook, I updated my data protection policy, we had GDPR training, I've encrypted all my laptop, I've remote wiping functionality, and equally we've done the same for all of our phones. So we've tried to protect it as much as we can, and then we try and do GDPR more awareness. Does that make sense? And another tip for you as well is to educate yourself is if you go to the Data Protection Commissioner's, the Irish website, she actually they publish all the case studies of prosecutions, for the last 20 years. And you really educate yourself, because what was going on before in terms of the general data protection since 1998 and 2003, it's exactly the same. They've just embellished it further to make it more specific. So yes, Declan, good answer, or good question. Unfortunately, we're held accountable as business owners.